All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to wait just a minute or two before we officially get started. In the meantime, if you'd like to access the captions for today's webinar, you can click the CC button on your Zoom menu to access those captions, and you can also click the link that I'm going to drop in the chat in just a moment right now. If you'd like to open the captions in a separate window. We'll get started in just a minute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Oh, my internet froze for a second. Am I good now? Great. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started as folks are still joining us. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's panel conversation on best practices for ASL interpretation in virtual theater. My name is Kirsten Sweeney. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Education and Access Coordinator at Art New York. To give a brief visual description, I'm a white woman in my mid-20s. I've got shoulder length, dark brown hair and dark framed glasses. I'm wearing a blue floral print t-shirt, and there's some prints on the walls behind me. Before we begin, I want to give a massive thank you to Hands On for partnering with Art New York on this two-part panel series on ASL in theater, and also for all that Hands On does to support making theater more accessible in New York City. Today's discussion will be presented in both ASL and English with interpreters on screen throughout the event. Our wonderful captioner, Joe Gale, is providing real-time captions for us today. And as I said earlier, you can access the captions by clicking the CC button on your Zoom menu and clicking Show Subtitles, or by clicking the stream text link, which I will drop in the chat right now, to access the captions in a separate window. So you can participate in today's discussion by using the Q&A feature, which is also found on your bottom Zoom menu bar. So feel free to drop your questions and thoughts in the Q&A box throughout the event, and we will leave time at the end to answer some of your questions. You can also use the Q&A box to let us know if you're having any technical issues or to just say hi to your fellow attendees. For those of you who are here today getting CEUs for today's panel, we'll be sending out a link to the evaluation form. I'll drop it in the chat towards the end of the event, along with the special password that you need to use. So make sure you stick around to the end of today's session in order to get that information. Before we begin, I'm going to offer up a land acknowledgement. And so we have people today calling in from many different locations and many different time zones. And even though we're not all currently sharing the same physical space, it's still important for us to be conscious of the land that we are on. So with that in mind, I would like to take this time to pay respects to the Lenape Nation, whose stolen land I currently reside on. And I also want to acknowledge that wherever we're currently located on Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America, we are on occupied territory. I want to honor and celebrate all of these Indigenous communities, their elders past and present, as well as future generations. I also want to take this time to acknowledge that after there was stolen land, there were stolen people. And I want to honor the generations of displaced and enslaved people that built and continue to build the country that we occupy today. And since we are gathered today in virtual space, let's also take a moment to consider the legacies of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities, and even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous people worldwide. So I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, anti-racism, and allyship. Thank you. And I also just want to say thank you to Adrian Wong of Spider Web Show in Ontario, who wrote the virtual part of that land acknowledgement and allowed us to use that language. So this whole time that I've been talking, the wonderful interpreter Justine has been signing right alongside me. And I want to thank her for her work. And our full interpreting team, I want to welcome them to come on screen and share a little bit about what their process for today's event is going to be. So Dylan, take it away.
Hey everybody, I want to introduce you to the interpreting team. We have Justine, Heather, and myself. And just a quick note about our process is interpreting is all about human interaction. And in that, sometimes there's going to be misunderstandings. So you might see or hear one of us chime in, clarify a few things, and that's part of the process. Justine and I will be remaining on camera, interpreting from spoken English into ASL. And Heather's actually going to duck out for video real estate purposes, and she will be interpreting from ASL into spoken English.
Great, thank you all for your work today. And so finally, now I would like to introduce today's speakers. So once I say your name, feel free to pop on screen. So today we're going to be talking to Rich Denny, who's the Director of Audience Services at the Public Theater. Hi, Rich. Beth Prevor, the Executive Director of Hands On. She also is an accessibility consultant with Art New York and a part-time access coordinator with the New Jersey Theater Alliance. And last but certainly not least, Ann Tomasetti, who wears many, many hats, including being a nationally certified deaf interpreter, a director of artistic sign language, and an advisor. So that is all from me. I'm going to mute myself and go off camera and let this group take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm going to first start. My name is Rich Denny. I'm the Director of Audience Services at Public Theater. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a white cisgender male of a certain age, we'll say 40 something, dark brown hair, full lips. I'm wearing a white button-up collared shirt with a blue undershirt, and my background is of green palm fronds disappearing into the darkness. I'm going to hand it over to Beth Prevor.
Thank you, Rich. Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Prevor. My pronouns are she, her. My visual description is I am a mature, white, disabled woman with short gray hair. I'm wearing a black top. I'm sitting in my home office with a whiteboard behind me and some bookshelves behind me. And I will pass it off to Ann.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ann Tomasetti. My pronouns are she and her and hers. And I'm a white woman at a good age right now. I have a navy blue shirt on with buttons down the middle. And my background is gray with some light coming in and shimmering off of it. And that's all.
Thank you, Anne. So from here, I just want to take a moment. We want to start with what we're coming to look at, which is The Line, which was a production created, a digital production created by the Public Theater. We'll go in a little bit more about the overall concept of it, but I think it's best to kind of start right from the very beginning of showing you all the really fantastic work that Anne and all of our deaf artists did to interpret the piece. And this is probably one of the busiest moments in the video itself. So just switching over now to sharing my screen.
In China, something happening over there.
We started talking about it in February, but I was just focused on surviving my first intern year. I wasn't even wearing a mask back then. You just feel like you're being dramatic.
The information that we had was that it wasn't affecting healthy young people. And I just thought something that's far away is far away. And right now there are people in front of me that need my care. And I can't be worried about something that's not here yet. That's the government's job.
I think mid-January, I said, okay, this is going to be an interesting ride, because look at New York City. I mean, how many people ride the trains? How many people ride the buses? We're all just keeping a wary eye.
I pay attention to the news. As paramedics, you're always looking at different articles and going, yo, check this study out. We've been talking about COVID for a minute. Like, yo, check it. China has another thing going on. Yo, we got to be careful, because you got to understand, like, we went through Ebola, right? You had Zika virus, you had Ebola, you had the West Nile, you had the H1N1, SARS. We were like, yo, what if it comes over here?
I left my last job at the end of December, and I took February off to go to Southeast Asia for 5 weeks.
So that is our first introduction to The Line.
Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and
hitting the wrong buttons, folks. Already messing up. I think you can guess that The Line was created specifically in response to COVID-19 pandemic and its effect across the entire world. Just a very direct moment. The Line is a new play by Jessica Blank and Eric Jensen, created in the award-winning documentary style that brought you The Exonerated, Aftermath, and Coal Country. In spring 2020, they conducted anonymous interviews with New York City frontline medical workers battling the COVID-19 virus. Said The Line creators Jessica Blank and Eric Jensen, through these interviews, we began to see care as a radical response to institutionalized violence in the systems that perpetuate it. Created from quarantine in rapid response to this national emergency, The Line presents a fundamental redefinition of what it means to protect and serve, examining the fault lines in our system through the words of the brave people who show up every day to care for us all. If my voice sounds a little bit crackly, I'm going to blame Beth Prevor for a second, because she often text messages me about The Line and says she watched another section and was crying. And reading that description, she's inspiration through text message from Beth. So first, I want to take a moment to introduce the relationship between the Public Theater and Hands On, a relationship that goes 37 years now, Beth. Is that the number we finally landed on?
I think we're getting close to 38.
So for 38 years, Hands On has been interpreting at the Delacorte Theater for free Shakespeare in the Park. And over the past 3 years, we've been making the transition into ensuring that Hands On and the deaf community that uses ASL has space inside of our downtown venue at the Public Theater, and specifically focusing on bringing ASL interpretations to our new work at the Public Theater. It has grown from 3 performances to before the pandemic, we were doing every single performance. And really, as we were taking that on, I do want to share with you another clip moment, the real movement of how we were able to pivot our relationship from just interpreting our work to us really listening to our deaf artists and really making sure this community has a voice inside of our organization was through our work with Alexandria Wales. Alexandria was in a piece with us called For Color Girls. And it was a revival moment for us because it was created at the Public Theater. But what was really amazing is that we had worked with Alexandria before, and it was not the most positive experience. And she was willing to give us another try. And she was only willing to give us another try through her relationship with Hands On and wanting us to do better and wanting us to make space like we should have been doing all along. But I just want to show a moment of Alexandria in rehearsals for it because it's really beautiful.
Had finally won tonight. The mulatto, Raoul, was supposed to hold the booming half-caste Seared Eagle in a bear hug. 8 counts, get thrown unawares, fall out the ring, and then do Searing Eagle in for good. Sesha could hear redneck whoops and slapping on the back. She gathered her sparsely sequined skirts, tugged the waist cincher from behind her graying slips, and made her face immobile. She made her face like Nefertiti approaching her own tomb. She suddenly threw her leg full force through the canvas curtain. A deceptive glass stone sparkled. One of the wrestlers had finally.
So thank you for indulging just for a moment while we shared Alexandria's, the movement of improving the relationship and really trying to do better across the board. So with all this in mind, we then moved very quickly and swiftly. We were moving towards Coal Country, which was had just debuted on March 9th of 2020. Beth and the Hands On team were preparing to do the first interpretive performance. I believe that's Saturday, March 14th, when March 12th, the theaters in New York City closed and everything went on pause. From there, the public very quickly pivoted to digital theater and creating new digital theater. And the first piece we did was a Zoom production called What Do We Need to Talk About, which was a extension of the Apple Family Plays, which is a set of plays that we've been doing over some time with Richard Nelson. And in my role as Director of Audience Services at the Public Theater, my responsibilities are not only in serving the many communities and working on accessibility for the organization, but also all of our customer service for all of our teams. So my brain went directly to refunds and exchanges and keeping money on account and negotiating through the many conversations that were going on about what was coming next, because we all didn't know what was coming next. And I missed a really amazing opportunity to include disabled communities as a whole, because we presented what do we need to talk about, and my mind was not where it should have been, and Beth called me on it. And after the show debuted, she just said, hey, I want to talk about this. I want you all to do better. Get it, Anne? What?
Busted. You got busted.
I did. I admit it. I say that on every time I do a panel on this show, I openly admit I was busted and I was called on it, and it was the right thing to do. And so from there, we made arrangements and plans because the line was just being discussed at that point in time. We had planned to offer, God, y'all, it's been a hard year. Just need to take a moment and just breathe. From there, Beth and Hands On had made arrangements to assist us with our first attempt at a digital gala. And we had gone into rehearsals and we're working through that process. Anne was our dazzle for that. And we were very lucky to be working with an outside production company. And unfortunately, at that point in time, shortly before what was to be our digital gala, George Floyd was murdered. And we made a decision as an organization to not move forward with our gala at that point in time. We felt that it was not the right time to host that event, and we visited it later in the fall in a different format. But then, right as they had planned to be, hands-on and Anne and the entire interpretive team was there with us so that we could make sure when we made that announcement about why we were canceling, all of our communities were being served again. But this all set us up for success. So that's a very long, winding road. But what it did is that it started to set us up for success for the line. And for the line, Beth really enjoyed Coal Country. And I shared with her that we were looking to do this piece with Jessica and Eric. And Beth kind of ran from there. Beth, do you want to talk about a little bit what your thought process was when I started to share what was going on with the piece?
Sure. Thanks, Rich. I will have to say, and I'm going to pass a lot of this off to Anne, once we start talking about the interpretation, but this was at the very early start of the pandemic. I think we were in it like 3 months, and having the conversations with Rich at this point about the topic of the play, and also having just been working on Coal Country and the format of it and the power of that piece, and knowing that the line was about first responders and about the pandemic and about something that was so personal to New Yorkers and everything that we were going through, I was really pushing for that as something that was really important for everyone, which includes the deaf community, to be a part of and to be able to experience. And this was, honestly, before I actually knew exactly what it was, but I knew it was about something that was very personal to all of us, and that's what should be our first foray into this virtual realm that we were going into, and also because we really didn't know what we were getting into. This was a whole new medium for us for interpreting, and we weren't quite sure how to do it. But I will add at this point too that our relationship with the public, and especially with Rich, has been so long and supportive that the conversations were, we don't really know how to do this and we will need help, but we really want to do it. And so from that very start, we knew that whatever we would need to learn, we wouldn't be left alone. And so we were getting into this whole other area of video and digital, and we're not really quite sure what to do. But at every step of the way, we had the support of the theater, of knowing that we could ask a question, and then it was like Rich's job to figure out who to go to answer it. And that was such a comfort, I think, on our end, to be able to go into this going, we're not really quite sure what we're doing, but we knew we wouldn't be left alone. So it was the piece, I think, that was really important to me at that point, to make sure that this was if we were going to start this, that this was the first piece we wanted to start with, because it was an important piece. So that was me. That was my, entry into this. And, from there, I went to Anne. And, I'm going to give a little bit more about Anne's background. Anne has worked with Hands-On for many years. Anne has been our person as the Dazzle for the Shakespeare in the Park for probably 10 plus years, 15 plus years. I don't even know at this point how long, but
Way more than that. Way more.
for a very long time. So, so I kind of thought that I wanted her a part of this, and she had been working on the gala. So it just seemed like a natural extension of this would be our first foray. So that was us.
Beth, when you approached Anne, what was it specifically that you presented to her? And then I would like Anne to share a little bit about her thought process after it was originally shared, this concept and idea.
Okay, so I'll go real fast. We had just finished the gala, or not finished the gala, but we had been working on the gala, and she had worked on it. And I think she was really getting into like the editing process of interpreting. And so this was a show with the public. And so she was like the natural person that I went to work on it. And that was, I just didn't have anybody else that I would have gone to. So now I'm going to pass it over to Anne to talk a little bit about what happened then.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. What a fabulous introduction, blushing. So when Beth approached me about the line, with the story about the line, at first, I didn't really think about having deaf interpreters, deaf artists involved. I wasn't initially thinking about that. I was just thinking about interpreting. And then once we were talking about it more, and once I learned more of what the line looked like, and that there will be 8 individual hearing actors who will do a monologue solo, I thought about it more. And I felt that at the time, well, when COVID hit, I noticed that there was a lot more deaf interpreters who, well, there are so many deaf interpreters around the country, but they were more visible. They were doing a lot of emergency work. You saw them on the screens next to the mayors and all of the state representatives. And so they were in the spotlight and they were getting a lot of attention, which brought that to my attention to think maybe we should use them. So at that time, I thought that, well, maybe we should find deaf interpreters. We should use them for this production. I thought it would be perfect because it's pre-recorded and we have plenty of time for the deaf artists to be able to work together. And I thought this was a perfect example for us to get these deaf interpreters involved and for us to work together. And there was some roadblocks, some problems that we were thinking about with the editing and how do we record everything. And we didn't have to worry about a lot of it, but I was ready. I was ready to take on these challenges and to make sure that we had the deaf interpreters in the spotlight and that we were able to showcase them through the screen and to get that same feeling. I was ready for this. And when Beth asked me, I said, yes, she didn't really have to convince me. It was kind of a no-brainer. I was ready to jump right into it. And we just took off with the process. It was great.
And this is Beth. I just also want to add to what Anna's saying. I mean, the format of the piece ended up being like really important to us about how we work, because again, this was like our first time doing digital, like virtual theater. And so how you could work with interpreters and what would be clear to an audience and how the dialogue would work, we weren't sure about. So the idea that, as Anne said, this was individual conversations, it said, oh, that seemed possible. And then the idea of working with, deaf interpreters or deaf artists that sounded great. That as Anne said, I don't think that we went into this thinking we're going to work with deaf artists. That wasn't our first thought process. We just looked at the piece and thought it would work. And then I think then Anna and I talked about like our needs, that we would need certain things about, captioning or how the deaf artists would be able to access the work that they would have to do. I mean, we ended up hiring a sign language interpreter for 3 days, the 3 days of the dress rehearsal, and just to have somebody available for the deaf interpreters to be able to access the performance and the rehearsals and everything that was going to be verbal, which was a help. So as we were thinking about the process and thinking about our needs, we started going, oh, I think we need to bring in an interpreter. And and again, I don't mean to gush about Rich and the public, but everything that we asked for, that we needed, was met. I mean, it was a challenge. Everything was a challenge. We talked about, and I guess we'll talk about this a little later, we talked about the need for if the deaf interpreters were going to watch the production, then it needed to be captioned for them to be able to know what was going on. There was a song at the end that wasn't visible that we had to figure out time codes and things. I mean, so it was definitely, we were learning as we went, and as we learned things that we needed, we asked and went back to the theater. So that's part of that was part of the process of going into this, and not necessarily knowing what we needed until we needed it.
And Beth, I'm going to share that, like, I appreciate all the positivity. It's interesting. I've never heard Anne talk about where the kind of inspiration came from. These moments of watching the mayor speaking with deaf interpreters, and these interpreters spread out throughout the country. And I have to be honest with you, when the two of you brought the concept of moving from hearing interpreters to deaf interpreters, or using deaf artists for interpreting this piece, I had no fear. I shared that understanding that just as much as we were going to work to hold and lift you all up, you were also coming to us with a plan that was going to hold and lift up this piece. It was very important over the past year for the Public Theater to be supporting artists, all artists, in any way that we possibly can. But also, what an exciting concept to think about, that in this moment of digital theater, where there are no boundaries of space and time, it's not about flying people in and putting them up in your space, or finding hotels or anything else. We were unbound by space and time to do this work. And it really meant that we could bring more artists into the storytelling that we were doing. And especially with, we're all hoping that digital theater is not going away for a number of reasons, as we feel comfortable returning into public spaces, but also the level of access that has been brought to digital theater that was not always available for in-person performances. What an exciting thing to kind of keep in your mind as you move through that, as how do we bring the disabled communities into these conversations, and disabled artists into these conversations, to make sure that their voices are being heard, and then they're also being represented as artists. So it is still one of the things that makes me the most happy about our decision moving forward. And so I thank you and Anne for that. I want to go from there. Anne,
Can I jump in? This
sure,
is
Heather. Yep.
This is Anne. So just related to what you were saying, I just want to jump in on that. There were several things. And yes, there are several deaf interpreters that were out on the screens and in the country at the time, and that did impact me and inspire me. But what I really believe that we were able to do this, and I love working in theater, and I love that during this time of COVID, there was a lot of anxiety for us actors and us artists during that time to find work, because Broadway was closed. There were a lot of deaf artists who weren't able to get work, and their talents were not being utilized or shown. And so when the Public Theater opened it up and allowed us to bring in the deaf interpreters, I thought that was great to build a foundation to welcome us and to welcome artists into your space. And we were able to create this, which was fantastic. And it was such a wonderful opportunity. So thank you for the support. Thank you for supporting deaf artists. It was not something that we just saw like, oh, there's a deaf interpreter, we're just gonna put them in there. This was very intentional. This was something that we knew we can do, and your support was really important. And we are glad that we were able to really showcase the deaf actors and the artists in this experience. And with the time of online world, we were able to really collaborate, and we were able to share our normally 3D language in a 2D format. And it was just fantastic. And it was just inspiring, really.
And this is Beth. And just to kind of tag on to that too, is, at the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, I think Rich made this point too, artists were suffering. I mean, everybody was suffering. And so in terms of like the deaf community and deaf interpreters, except for the people that, ended up being on, television a lot with governors and mayors, but, there was less work that was going on. So the idea that we could also provide, a work environment for people that had less work than, maybe other groups of people. That was important. And then I will say too, is I did think too, the idea of having, deaf people involved in this as interpreters, as artists, would also kind of help with the marketing. And that was also a really, important aspect of making sure that this piece was seen by audiences, because, as we'll probably talk about at some point, just because you have something accessible doesn't necessarily mean the community that uses those services is going to know about it. And so the kind of marketing aspect of it is really important. And so the idea that we had all these wonderful deaf artists involved along with Anne just meant they were really proud of it. So they were going to go, they told their friends, and they kind of spread the word out into the community that to come and watch this, which, I think, Rich will probably talk about some of the numbers later, but it had a lot of clicks. I mean, a lot of people and a lot of deaf people watched this. And so that was part of my interest in kind of doing something that was a little bit different, is that this would make an impact to the community. And that was also one of the goals, is that it's not only that it was a great piece and really well done, that this was done by deaf people and the deaf community would watch it.
So from here, I want to pivot a little bit more in some direct moments with Anne. And specifically, Anne, what was your process of casting? What was your process of having those communications and approaching people along the way?
This is Anne. I think that was actually one of my favorite parts of the process. It was so nice to be able to cast who I wanted to be in this production. At first, I was talking with Beth and I was thinking, who are they? Who are these 8 people? Are they famous people? Who are the actors, the hearing actors? So when she gave me all the names, I was able to research them and to read the script and to learn more about the actual characters. And then when I was able to see them, and I was to see their face and how they looked and how they talked, and I was just getting the real feel for their personality and the energy that they were bringing to the screen. And from that, I just saw them and I would watch and I would get the vibe. I would instantly, somebody would come to me and I would wait until they came. And then I wrote a list of people that I wanted. And I had a picture board with everybody's faces that I wanted. So I had the deaf artists and the hearing actors. And I was thinking about who would be a good match for them. And it wasn't just based on skills, it was based on their artistry and their energy and their personality all mixed together, and how they would naturally fit with the hearing actors. And I was trying to figure out what would make sense with the story. I wanted to make sure that everything just flowed. And with all of that thought process, I made a dream cast list of who I wanted. And then I just went ahead and cold called people. I reached out to them, some of the deaf people that most of them I do know. For example, Wawa, he was actually driving when I called him, and he got the call while he was driving, and he said, Anne, oh wait, what do you want? So he actually pulled over, and then I was able to convince him and ask him if he wanted to be in this play. So I just reached out to everybody, called them, asked them to be involved, and it was great. And it was really impactful. It was so wonderful to have this cast for this story. And it was so great for them to be seen. And, I don't know if it could have been an easier process. It was great. The casting process went pretty well. And some people didn't turn it down. Actually, no, they didn't. They all accepted it. They did. Yep. I actually was able to get the cast that I wanted. One person, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to work it out with the time, but we were able to. And so I got my dream cast. It was thrilling.
This is Beth. I mean, she was also very intentional. I mean, that we created kind of like symmetry of race and ethnicity with the entire cast. She also there was symmetry with the color of their shirts, which after kind of rewatching it this afternoon, everybody's wearing the same color as their actor. So it's, again, because we're in this virtual environment and you're watching it, you're so close and you're so like on your computer watching it, you don't have that, we don't have that distance anymore. I mean, it's right there. And so this idea that, yeah, and again, Anne is going to talk about this because it's what the piece looks like on the computer. It's a whole framing of not, you don't have the stage anymore. We have just this computer screen. And so what the interpreters look like on this screen has to really be a part of the piece. That's the artistic quality that I think worked so well with it. It's that it's one piece. The interpreters are part of the picture. And Anne, I'm sure, is going to talk a little bit about just that part.
Yeah, that's coming up. And
Sure, I can add to that.
Sorry, Ayanna, I'm going to hand it over to you. Women, we keep calling the interpreters. I just want to bring their name into the space real quick because I think it's important to kind of acknowledge each of them. Michelle A. Banks, Leela Chaitu, I think I'm saying that properly, and if I'm not, I apologize all.
Chaitu.
Frank L. Ditalo, Dickie Hartz, Amelia Hensley, Aaron Kuby, Warren Wawa Snipe, Alexandria Wells. But as we continue to talk about it, thought it was important to share all of their names first. And we have a specific thing. I think there's two sides: the success of the design of the interpretation, which Beth was kind of hitting on, about staging and being able to be in space. And so I want you to hit a little bit about your thinking there. We're definitely going to have a moment of also visiting the challenges of being in that artistic interpreter space. But we'll hit that in the next section. But Anne, go ahead, take us with the successes.
Sure. So our fabulous deaf artist who we were able to cast, we wanted to find a way to work with them and to make sure that this was theatrical and cinematic. And all of us really enjoy watching movies, and we shared a bunch of things that we like, and we looked at the actors and we really got to know them. And we tried to figure out what are the attributes of the person? How can we match their signing style to match what the hearing actors are speaking and how they're saying their words? And on stage with interpreters, it's very different. So this was a different experience for me. And it was a huge benefit to be able to look at this space, because I was able to apply some creative choices to what we were able to do. And yes, I directed all their costumes. I did tell them what to wear, and I told them to bring a bunch of shirts, and we did have a few costume changes, and I would approve whether or not that they looked appropriate. And one of the deaf artists went and got an actual nurse's uniform, a scrubs. And so it really, they worked hard to make sure that they looked appropriate and matched their characters. And the reason why is because I wanted to respect what Jessica Blank was doing. I wanted to respect her script and everything that she did. And what Jessica was talking about was an experiment at this point with the stage becoming something on screen. And I wanted to honor all of the work that she did. And talking about the aesthetics, I really respect Jessica and what she did. She had a vision. She had a solid vision, both Jessica and Eric together. And I didn't want it to be offensive to throw just the interpreter on the screen. I wanted it to be smooth. I wanted it to respect what she did. And I wanted the interpreters to add to it. And I wanted them to blend with the story, but I also wanted to have our artists be able to be creative and for all to flow together. So we really worked on the lighting. We worked on making sure that the window where you saw the deaf artist didn't have a border. We wanted it to blend in with their background of the actors. There were a lot of choices that we made that we thought about. We weren't sure where to put the box. We were moving it all over the screen. And initially, Jessica didn't want the interpreters right there. I think that for her, she had a vision that she wanted, and we were thinking about maybe doing a split screen. And so she can have her full screen and we can put an interpreter over to the side in a different window, actually, not on top of it. And we weren't sure if that was going to work. She did let us play with it. We collaborated together and we eventually came to an agreement of where it should be. And it was huge for us to have the director, the writer, the musical composers, everybody involved. And it was a huge partnership. It wasn't just an interpreting experience, having some interpreters do the work and get on stage. It was an actual show, a production with everybody involved, and everybody had buy-in. And we were able to accomplish the same goal together.
And this is Beth. I think that's just a really important point, that it wasn't just quote like an interpretive performance, and we didn't just stick the interpreter in a bubble and just do it, that there really was buy-in from everybody on the theater end, so that the piece that was produced was a piece of art. That, so the framing and really understanding, and the welcoming in from the production people of us was something that we don't always get. And so in this space, when again we're asking questions, and everybody's asking questions at this point, us, the production people, it was a new thing for everybody. So this idea that we were a part of their conversation, that we didn't want this to be just, like Ann said, slapped on and just kind of adding a bubble, that we really wanted this piece to be a total piece, like a piece of art. And I'm so proud of the piece. I think that in this last year, things that I've seen over the years, not to slight anybody else, but it's a beautiful piece. And it's a piece that's total, that really is not even an interpretive performance. It's a performance that's just available and accessible to everyone as a piece, not as an interpreted piece or an add-on, or it really was thought through by everybody for the whole process. And again, I just want to thank the public for like welcoming us in. Any question we had, we were invited in to meet the cast. We were, Anne had access to Jessica. We were allowed to ask questions about the song at the end, what things meant. Alexandria Wales interpreted the song, and there were questions about the lyrics. And I went to Jessica and asked her questions, and we talked about it, and I went back to Alexandria. It was such a collaborative experience on all points that it was just a joy to work on. And then, the cherry on top is just that it came out so beautifully. So it was like everybody's work. I can't even like call it work. It was just a pleasure to be able to do it. And the end result was just beautiful.
This is Rich. I just want to highlight for a moment the importance, and things are being repeated here, the importance of offering your artists that are working on making your work accessible access throughout the organization. We had very clear communication between Anne and the interpreters and Beth and our company manager, and very open communication to the artists and the directors and our video team and our sound team. And I don't think this would have been successful if it was constantly being pushed through a filter of just me. It was very important for this to be successful, to open up that access and to collaborate as a group. And so I just want to highlight that as we're thinking about how we bring these relationships into our organizations, that it was successful because we took down the walls and focused on collaborating to bring the best thing possible. But it was not without its challenges. So the line premiered live on YouTube, and the intention was for the piece to offer live closed captions. And YouTube has been pivoting and changing and doing new things over the years as more things have moved online and live premiered. But unfortunately, our live captions broke and did not run. And so first, that was a mental downfall for me, because we had been messaging that it would be up and running, but it presented very specific challenges for Anne and the interpreters and the entire plan. And so Anne, I just want to take a moment for you to like talk through this challenge and the larger process of how we then addressed it and pivoted.
With the captions, yes, this is Anne. So my actors needed access to the videos. And that required, well, they needed the pre-recording, the final show. They needed what the line was done with. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to break in for a second because I just want to give a little bit of a time, like just to give people an understanding of kind of the time process to understand what we were doing on this kind of opening night. And then I'm going to send it back to you for the problem. So we had, in terms of the time, we knew that the show was going to be live on July 8th. I think that's what it was. So we had, before then, we had scripts. Anne was already, we had the interpreters picked. Anne was working individually, with each one of the deaf interpreters on their characters, probably for a week or two before the show went kind of live. There was a dress rehearsal probably on the 7th, I think, that we kind of just showed up and just kind of watched everybody do their regular dress rehearsal. And then on the 8th, which was when the show went live, we all kind of gathered together and we were going to watch the show live, and that was going to be our dress rehearsal. So all the deaf interpreters were ready. We were going to be kind of watching the show together with captions, which is what we were told. It was going to be open captioned. So now the deaf interpreters were going to be able to watch the show with captions, do their dress rehearsal, and then we then had, I think, about 4 or 5 days after that before the ASL version needed to be sent to the public. So so I just wanted to catch people up on that part of the process. And now I'll give it back to Anne. Did I do everything?
I think you just mentioned everything I was going to talk about. You brought up the problem.
Oh.
Okay. Well, so the captions weren't ready. And we were there for the dress rehearsal, and our poor interpreter had to interpret the whole entire show because we didn't have the captions available. And that interpreter did an amazing job. And I actually think it was a little beneficial for the deaf artists because they were able to see someone actually taking the English and putting it into ASL. So they were actually able to see the interpretation. So they were able to maybe mirror what they were going to sign, or that was the actual interpretation for it. And then they could make it something more unique with their character and add some of their flavor to it. So it was interesting to see that add to their artistry. So there was maybe a benefit from it, but we needed those captions for the recording. And I needed to work with the editors, and they needed to know the sound cues of when our lines were. It was actually really interesting because I didn't know a lot about sound cues, so I had to learn about that. But we had to make sure that both the deaf artists and that the hearing actors were running parallel. So that was something we had to figure out. And as the captions were delayed, we weren't able to get them right away, but the problems seemed to be solved, and we were able to get the videos to the deaf actors, and we had the dress rehearsal with their full gear all ready to go. And they were checking with me. We were making sure that they were in frame and that everything looked good. And then they self-recorded their parts, and then they would send it to me. And sometimes I would have some notes and they would change things. One actor did, interpreter, he actually did overact a little bit, and we had to kind of reel it in and bring it back. But we were able to work it out, and we got the piece that we wanted. And during the recording, I actually had to text some of them and to remind them that their sound had to be on. So we needed to make sure that while they were signing that the sound was on. So when we gave it to the editors, they were able to work with it. So we had on 2 screens, you had their recording, and then we also had the show running. And then I told them that they needed to end exactly when they saw the captions end, because they weren't able to go on afterwards because they had to make sure that they were cutting at the same time when the next actors were coming on. And so the editors and I had to work with that through Zoom, which was very interesting. And we were making sure that, that some of the actors maybe cut off too soon, and then the interpreters went on, and we were trying to figure it out. And I had to coordinate with the editors, but we worked it out. I think that's everything. So that was sort of the process afterwards when we finally did get the actors to record all of their pieces.
This is
And
Rich.
this is,
Go
wait,
ahead,
this,
Beth.
I just wanted to add to, because I do want to give a shout out to Ito. I don't know his last name, who is the tech director, I think. Is
Our
that his
video
title?
director of
Video director at the Public, who we had been working with on the gala. So he knew us, he knew the interpreters, and he was great to work with. And I will say, for anybody thinking about doing virtual interpreting, that you need a deaf person to work on the editing. And that I think, in terms of future things, is that in terms of timing, in terms of making sure signs are not being cut off, in terms of making sure that interpreters are staying within their box and they're clear. I mean, that's where you need somebody who knows sign language. And, I mean, Anne's point about telling the deaf interpreters that they had to keep their sound on was because they were sending their video to somebody who didn't know sign language. So he needed to make sure that he was putting the right interpreter with the right person, since he just doesn't know sign language. So having somebody involved and to do another production, I mean, I'll just throw this in too. We did a production, the next one we did, next show that Hands On did, was with Signature Theater. And I think it's going to be out in July, which was a similar format of it. And we actually added like kind of a staff person who was a deaf person who kind of functioned as a tech person. So it really is, Anne did double duty in terms of doing both, but it's these two pieces like coming together that are really important. It's not just the sign language interpreters, it's really how you match it then with the piece to make it this seamless one piece. So it's not two separate things. You're really looking at the whole piece.
So I think it's really important. First, I'm going to say his full name, Ito Levrin, who is our video supervisor for the Public. And Anne and Ito have become very good friends. They spent many a Red Bull and coffee hour working through the final edit, because I was very animate that we were going to deliver on time and that we were going to release this video. But I think it's really important to call forward real quick the teamwork that was there. Ito saying, I need this to accomplish what you need, and Anne working through how to best respond to that and do that work that the sound was matching up. I think that's a really important thing to talk about. Again, teamwork and access to each other and having those conversations. And I'm going to quote David Chu, which I'm sure many of you know from the captioning community throughout the country. David did our captioning work on this piece for the actual final release, and then tried his hardest to make everything work on YouTube that night, and YouTube was not our friend. But David has said repeatedly that he loves watching this version of the production, and he loves watching it with the captions on, because he has never seen the captioning and the ASL interpretation and the performance line up like this ever. Having a moment where everyone is paused and no one is speaking and every single thing has lined up was really a great feat. And that came because of Anne's work with Ito and those conversations. And that was really important. Anne also hit a piece of one of the challenges, which was acting versus interpreting. Go ahead.
All night.
And hit a section of acting versus interpreting. And so I have pulled that video clip. And so we'll watch that a little bit closer as we look at some different video clip moments because I want her to be able to give feedback about what that was. I think it's a really interesting conversation for this. And before we move into kind of talking about and looking at some additional video clips and allowing you to give some feedback after watching it, do you have anything else that you want to share before we move into like watching the videos?
This is Anne. No, I think we're ready.
Great. So we're going to jump into, and I think it's important, it was just Anne shared the ASL interpreter for rehearsals was Franchetta Perez. And so I think it's important to bring her name into the room and make sure everybody hears it.
Yes, this is Anne. I actually just wasn't sure if I was allowed to say her name. So I just wanted to make sure, but Franchetta, you're wonderful. And she just, without any rehearsal, any practice, had to just cold interpret that whole show. And it was phenomenal. And also, I just wanted to mention that there's a fine line between, it's a fine line. It's not always easy. There are deaf artists who are not actors. And there's some who have done some interpreting work and who are maybe, there's a fine line between the actors, deaf artists who are actors, and then deaf interpreters. Sorry, that was the interpreter, just clarifying. So that's the fine line between the ones who are able to have acting backgrounds. Maybe they are able to interpret with a little bit more experience as they have with acting, and the interpreters might need a little bit more of the acting part. But I think that there is a line that they need to know. Am I an interpreter or am I an actor? And this is something that we work with. And it really, their acting background does help them. And a lot of the interpreters were able to match with the hearing actors as well. And so this is an example of how deaf artists were deaf interpreters at the time.
Fantastic. This is Rich again. We are going to jump over into some of the video. The first one is from the very top of the show. This is a section of the show that all of us have talked about repeatedly because there was very specific work being done, and this was how detailed Anne and the interpreters were working. And I think it's great to bring into this space real quick.
Here, I'm here in the light, right here. Okay. My name's Oscar. I'm from Queens. I was born in the Bronx, but I grew up in Woodside, Queens. I moved to Florida when I was 16 because I used to get into a lot of trouble. Moved to Florida, still got in trouble. I came back to New York in 2000 and I've been back ever since. I quit high school and went to work at 16. I delivered furniture. I was going to school for computers and I finally found a job driving a shuttle bus. So right after 9/11, I was in Union Square and I was watching how the city was shut down. All the sadness, watching Maury Povich and everybody come, all the prayers at the park, all the pictures of the people. So I went to the company that does ambulance drivers and the guy said, "You have a license?" I was like, "Yeah, I got a license." And then he got into an argument with one of the EMTs. And so he was like, "You know what? You can start Monday." And then he fired the guy in front of me. November.
So that's a perfect place to pause for a second. And do you want to share anything specifically about that section of the video that like called to mind challenges or the work? You can see really quickly a lot of the work that you put in designing the interpretation and the work that the interpreters did.
This is Anne. Well, for that piece, for that clip that we just saw, I told the interpreter, Dickie, to bounce on his couch a lot, to be very animated and to stop bouncing on his couch a lot and to sit still and to not overact and to maybe just interpret the piece and to not be as dramatic because you were able to see the hearing actor be dramatic. And so sometimes we had to hone people in a little bit to make sure that they got the message in their interpretation and they were able to hit the points of what the hearing actors were saying. And I think that you were able to really follow along with it. And I think that they did become the characters and they were able to just directly tell the story. And I think you can see that in that clip right there.
And can you elaborate a little bit, one of the things that have been shared by the panels of like character depiction versus acting and language use for interpreters, especially in that section?
Yes, so the character depiction gives you a little bit more information of what the character is doing. You're not acting. For example, when you saw the interpreter Dickie, when he was saying they should fire that boss and the way that he moved his body, he became a little bit of the boss when he was moving and he was showing you where the boss was. And it was a way for him to engage the audience and to also convey the message of what was going on. And the guy, the hearing actor, is very New York. He has a lot of energy. He has a strong New York vibe. And I think that Dickie was able to mirror that. He didn't have to act it, but he was able to give that New Yorker feeling in his interpretation.
This is Beth. I think too, again, because of the medium that we're dealing with, because it's everybody's on the same screen, you know, Anne was able to get this really fine line between not acting, but not just kind of sitting there with no expression and really kind of tying the two people together. But we, you know, as interpreters, you don't want to take, you're watching a theater piece. There's an actor there. You don't want to take away from that actor, but you don't want to make this other person you can't avoid the fact that there's another person on that screen. And by being that close, you have to make it compatible. You have to make it so that they are kind of functioning as a team, as one, but you don't ever want to kind of mislead the audience to just go, there are two actors on stage. There's an actor and then there's an interpreter on stage, but how they mold together, I think was what Anne did, which was really well. And I do think this idea of deaf artists, like we didn't know what to call people at the beginning. Are they deaf interpreters? Are they deaf artists? I mean, we're an interpreting organization. So you just don't want to say we're providing actors.
Right, and Anne's just saying there's a lot of other deaf talent. There's so many different terms that we're not sure which one to stick with.
Right, and there were
just an ASL team is another one.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really, you know, and again, because this was our first time, it was, you know, and you know, she'll talk about the, you know, the going too far and then pulling it back about how you have to do that with interpreting. It's, you know, especially when you're watching an actor so close to you, you can, it's not like you have that distance that you have in a theater. It's like it's right in your face. It's right on your computer screen. So it's a real fine line.
So that's going to take us right into our next clip. Going to switch over into our next clip and just watch a little bit of this next section.
Someday, the only things that are going to be around are cockroaches and viruses because they are very adaptable.
I told you that first night in the hospital, my uncle had texted me, "Do you think I'm going to be okay?" And I told him yes. What do you say? No, you're going to die? So I have to live with that. This idea that maybe I gave him false hope, which is in stark contradiction to the oath that I took as a nurse. At worst, I think it was a white lie. At best, it was the truth I knew in the moment.
So although a fantastic scene, I'm going to pause there because I think, again, this is a great moment to talk about character depiction versus acting and Anne to kind of elaborate on this section.
This is Anne. Sure. I think with this specific clip, Aaron, who is the deaf talent interpreter, a part of the ASL team, he felt it. He really felt that moment. And I think he was emanating what the actor was doing originally. He was maybe showing some more emotion, maybe some tears or sighing. And that's not information that maybe needed to be given because you were able to see that. So I felt that his emotions, his first video that he sent me, I said that that was maybe a little bit more of the acting that we were trying to avoid. He was wiping some tears. I said, you don't need to wipe the tears. That's acting. And that's telling too much information that you see there on the screen. You can just use more of your interpreter background and less acting. And so he was able to redo the video, and he reluctantly did it again, and he put on his interpreter hat. And as you can see, that he was doing more of a character depiction in that version, where he was able to contain himself and he was able to deliver the message with the energy of the hearing actor, but he was quiet and more focused, and he was really relaying what the hearing actor was saying instead of acting it. And I really enjoy working with Aaron. He's fantastic.
So I have one more clip I'm gonna show here real quick, just the final outro, which is some really great thinking about moving forward in our future, all of us, as we're starting to come out of this pandemic. But it's also a really great moment into transitioning from the acting into the interpretation of the final song. From there, we'll check back in, get some feedback from Anne, and then we're gonna wrap this up and move this into a Q&A period for everyone. So I'm gonna jump right back over into video now.
View, I say, all right, let's imagine you're at your retirement party. What do you want people to say about you? What I want people to say about me is there was no task too big for me. That I was humble enough that no matter what, I would put on a pair of gloves, put on a gown, and just assist where I was needed. Even I don't care if that person was soiled from head to toe. I'm going in that I'm compassionate, that I'm kind, and that I will always fight for what's right. Those are some of the things that I would want people to say about me. I thought you said you were gonna behave. There's no yoga. Well, what about the animals? Oh, you don't want that. Oh, you gonna make me work now. All right, I'm coming.
And I'm going to stop share from there. And anything to add off of that last clip before we transition over into questions and so forth.
This is Anne. I don't really have anything else to say other than I love working with Michelle. She's so great. And Alexandria, when she translated the song, she did a lot of work to find the true meaning of the song. And that song was an original song by Amy Mann, and it's called Batten Down. And that song had a lot going on in it. When we originally got the lyrics, we actually didn't have the word, we only had the sound, and Beth was writing it down for us and typing the lyrics for us. And then we sent it to Alexandria, and she was working on it. We really didn't have any foundation of what it meant. And we were struggling trying to figure out the song because it was an original song. It wasn't a part of a whole Broadway show and something we could relate to. It was just a song at the end. So we were trying to figure out what they were trying to say, and it was hard for us to interpret that. And luckily, we were just giving Alexandria some of the themes of the play and some of the issues that were going on and that they were talking about. And then luckily we had access to Amy, who wrote the song, and we were able to ask her the meaning of the song and what she was thinking about when she was writing certain words. And then when she explained it to us, Alexandria was able to shape the whole thing. And also the sound. So for Alexandria, as a deaf person, she wasn't really able to listen to the music of it, but it's a little tricky with songs and when deaf people interpret them. But we were able to she pulled in a hearing person to help her with it so she could find where the rhythm was and where she was able to hit certain notes and where the beats were going and when it was maybe getting a little bit more excitable and slower. And so she had a lot of support. We all supported her, and we gave Alexandria so many resources, everything we could, because it was the final song of the show and it was the most important.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne. So we are going to transition out of this. I just want to share that the line is available to view. We've done a return of the line through June 21st at 11:59 p.m. It is viewable on YouTube by going to the Public Theater's YouTube page, where we have it. We're offering it with multiple levels of access. We have English closed captioning, Spanish subtitles, Mandarin or Chinese simplified subtitles. You can also, and then we have our American Sign Language version up on YouTube. On our website by visiting publictheater.org. You can visit our website, the Public Theater, or publictheater.org, and there we have an audio described version as well. On the website, you will need to create a Public Theater account or log in to watch the video, but we've, when Beth brought the challenge of you didn't do enough to get the first show in, what do we need to talk about? We went full out from that point and have really tried to maintain that full out. We were really excited to bring the show back for another 8 weeks, and I'm being forced to share at this moment in time, but it's also, it was important for me. As we announced the return, we were certain that all the interpreters who worked on the show were paid another weekly stipend for the 8 weeks of return, as well as Anne. And so it was, as we did that budget, as we did that work to bring this back and fund the return, the entire interpreting team was paid another stipend for that 8-week run of the show. And it's really important to continue those relationships beyond that first run.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's Kirsten. I'm back to moderate our 10 minutes or so of Q&A. If you have questions that you haven't dropped in the Q&A yet, please do. We might not have time to get to all of them live, but we'd love to hear what your questions are regardless. So I'm going to start with this first question. Maybe, Rich, this can be something that you can answer, but I don't know. We'll see. So an anonymous attendee says, this process of collaboration and post-production is impressive, but also time-consuming. How did you negotiate performer contracts to include this collaborative time? And were there any restrictions, union restrictions, on how you were able to make the final product available?
So we're going to split some time on this one specifically. I think we're going to lead with Beth because all the interpreters were contracted through hands-on, and then I can align with some additional information about making it accessible in both its runs. So go ahead, Beth.
I'm not quite sure. We didn't, I guess it is the question in terms of like the actors, the cast, and working with them, or our schedule.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's both. I think there's one thing we had a very clear conversation because of Beth and Anne and I, and also our legal department at the Public, because we are an equity organization. We work with equity directly. And so there was definitely a moment of, by using the language of deaf artist, are they working as an actor? Are they working as an artist under equity at this point in time? Or is they working as a contractor who is doing interpretation? And we felt like we had a very clear understanding of the delineation of what is equity actor and what is someone that is being contracted to interpret. Beth, do you want to elaborate that at all? Because I feel like that's part of the answer.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was a fee for service. I mean, the Public kind of paid us a lump of money, and we kind of paid it out to people as just a fee. And then Anne worked on schedules with everybody over, several weeks, and set that up. Yes, it was complicated for her because she had to meet individually with all the individual performances. We had a time frame of, like, we knew that we had prep time involved, but we knew once the show went live, we had like 5 days to get it. And so that was made clear to us, and that was really made clear to all the deaf talent in advance, that we had this time in advance, but once the show went live, you had to get your video up by Friday night. And that was, so everybody was aware of their time limits about when to get the video back and what they had to do.
And then to elaborate upon that, we have been in constant navigation and negotiation at the Public as we've been presenting digital theater during this time. Initially, a lot of our contracts were through equity, but we know that equity represents specifically stage actors. And so we've been kind of going back and forth as directed by our unions and relationships. I believe, and I hope no one quotes me and holds me on this, I believe this was done under an equity contract for our actors. And then we've had other work throughout the year that has been under the SAG-AFTRA contract. Whatever our initial contract was for the original run, we went back and revisited that and then contacted the artists about re-releasing and what would that cost be to re-release this video for the 8 weeks. And then we just tried from there to align that relationship of a return of pay to the interpreters as well. And I hope that answers the question.
And I just want to answer that. I mean, that was a huge surprise for us, and we were incredibly, as was everybody, very grateful. We weren't expecting it. And I mean, we're kind of like off on the side interpretation. We do it, we get paid, some money, and then we leave. So we're never really part of like union issues. So when I told everybody that it was going to be released, they were thrilled. But when I told them that they were also going to get paid, they were thrilled twice.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think we'll have time for one more question. Before that, quickly, I'm just dropping a link in the chat. If you are here for today's panel to get CEUs, the link to the evaluation form is in the chat. The code word is there, so fill that out so you can get your credit. But all right, our last question for today. This question is for Anne. So this person says, the monologue format worked so beautifully with picture-in-picture interpretation. Do you have suggestions for editing virtual theater with dialogue between characters? Would you encourage interpreters to record themselves together to fit in one box on screen? Other thoughts? I'll let you sort of, go forward with that.
Sorry, this is Anne. I don't know. Sorry, the interpreter didn't unmute herself. So if we were to see that again, I think it would be more interesting to play with different screens and to have maybe the interpreters become a part of the visual experience on screen. I think we could do picture in picture again. I think maybe two interpreters could be next to each other if there was a dialogue, or we could actually go to a theater if we were actually doing some live event that was being recorded with the interpreters on the stage with the background live and with all the actors there. I think that would be cool. I think there's so many options and we could really just come up with so many different ideas. And I think that we should keep exploring and not stop here.
Beth, you're unmuted. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that question? No.
No, I mean, I think that Anne's point is exactly right, is that we don't know. I mean, we're still playing. And so this was a great format to start with, and it really worked. But it was, I think there's other, I think given the openness of a theater and the production to experiment, I mean, that's where I think it is. I mean, I think if you're willing to try something, then we're willing to try it. And see where it goes. And I think that's the important thing, is to get willingness and not have to fight people on trying something. If you want to do it and you want to do it right, then we have to see what happens.
Exactly. And also, I think it depends on, every show is different. We can't just have some sort of standardized format of how we're going to do something. It really depends on the show. It depends on the feel of the space, of who's involved. It depends on everything. There's so many factors involved when making a decision for a production and when we decide of how to create virtual theater.
Great. And with that, we are just about at time.
Okay, so I just want to say I just want to thank,
ahead.
on behalf of everybody, I want to thank Kirsten and Art New York and for the collaboration of this. So, Rich and Anne, we thanked each other, but, Art New York sponsoring this panel, the next panel, the interpreting workshop, has been so incredibly supportive of not only hands-on, but the deaf community and the work that is being done and allowing us to experiment and create. And so I just want to thank you and Art New York for all the support in getting this done.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anne says. I really appreciate it.
That's very nice. Thank you. And, we at Art New York appreciate all of you so much. I mean, we couldn't do any of this without hands-on guidance and Beth's guidance and, all of you being here today. So with that, thank you to our wonderful panelists today, to our interpreters, to our captioner, and to all of you in the audience for tuning in to today's conversation. If you want more conversation like this, as Beth alluded to, we have another panel happening next week, same time, same place. I just dropped the link in the chat, and this will be a conversation with a bunch of dazzles, including Anne, about their roles and what it means to be a director of artistic sign language. So please do join us for that, and have a good rest of your Wednesday, everybody. Bye.